I wish to address the issue of this gentleman. He is my servant, and I am here to pay the debt against him.
It's so late.
Now, if the grainy video wasn't enough and you don't have this entire movie memorized from childhood, here are some clearer images of Danielle's court gown, as it's referred to. In this video, we are focusing on the foundation layer of this outfit. We do see Danielle wearing a shift under her work dress she wears for a lot of the movie, but the dress hanging up in the background of this shot looks like it's all built into one garment, so not super historically accurate. So to fix that, I will be actually making 3 separate garments for this gown. This garment is typically called a camicia, I think, the Italian word for shift. No extants exist from the early Renaissance time period, which is, by the way, for this dress around 1490s, but this painting is dated to 1494, depicting a woman in her shift. I found a couple of different construction methods for this approximate date, of course made up of rectangles and squares. These articles were very helpful, especially A Woman's Late 15th Century Camicia by T.H.L. Perrin Rose Whitehorse. I found this essay by Googling, and it was very helpful through this whole process, and I will link it down below and highly recommend reading it for anybody constructing any shifts for the Renaissance period, especially the late 15th century. My pattern is very based on hers, and I even got a lot of approximate measurements from hers as she documented trials and errors, changing things like gusset and overlap measurements and how it fit. I decided on a little less than double the largest part around my chest and my arms to decide the panel widths for the body and the sleeves. This was to ensure that I had lots to gather with along the neckline, and too big is much preferred to being too small, especially for a shift. Now to choosing the fabrics. Looking at screen captures, the sleeve puffs are a silk organza looking off-white material that has some sort of sparkly embellishments added to it. Because I don't want to use all see-through silk as a shift, the body will be made out of linen. I chose linen from fabricstores.com, and I got 5 yards of this at $11 per yard. This was way more than I needed, and this is the softened bleached linen, and I will link that below. I chose a silk organza fabric on Etsy in a champagne gold color, and this was $15 a yard, and I got 2 yards of it for this project. Shockingly, I started this project with the sleeves. These are essentially 2 giant rectangles, 25 inches by 30 inches for each arm. For the gussets, you need 2 6-inch by 6-inch squares. For sleeve assembly, Morgan Donner has an absolutely fantastic video on attaching a sleeve gusset with French seams. This is a godsend for getting the order of operations right. When attaching the first side, it's important to leave room that will become the seam allowance on the second side of the gusset seam. Now, the rest of the sleeve can simply be seamed together, starting where that last stitch left off. We are halfway done with the stitching for the sleeve, and by the way, I chose French seams because this is a super fiddly fraying fabric to work with, and I did not want to deal with any more raw edges than necessary, so French seams just seal it right up and then I don't have to deal with it. These first seams must be ironed well and trimmed short before stitching the second set of seams to complete the French seam. With the seams complete, it's best to iron that gusset into a triangle to make it easy for insertion into the body of the shift next. For assembling the garment, I need 2 giant body pieces. I start with the cut edge of the fabric that I ordered and pull a thread. This will give you a nice straight grain to start cutting with for these large rectangles. This can be a frustrating process as depending on the quality of your linen, the thread you're trying to pull will break and continue breaking, and if you're lucky you can still reach it, and If not, the worst case, you just cut down where you see your thread being pulled from until you reach where the thread broke and pick it up from there to continue. To make up the neckline, I decided to overlap the sleeve top with the side of the body piece by 3 inches. So you can see me mark that and then match that point I just marked to the top of the gusset. This is repeated on the other side of the body piece and then also on the other side for the other sleeve, carefully keeping all of the right sides together during this process. I decided to start the gores 5 inches down from the bottom of the sleeve, so I marked that to avoid seam ripping later. Again, I can't recommend Morgan Donner's video enough if you get confused and aren't quite sure how to insert sleeves into shifts. Super helpful. You'll notice I'm using pretty large seam allowances for what I normally do, and this is to help me with hand felling later, and also gives it more material for that fraying silk before it becomes a big issue if it's gonna keep fraying a lot. Once the sleeves were added, I measured from where I stopped the stitching on the side seam to the bottom of the shift and got that length for the gores, which I'm cutting from the extra strip of fabric when I cut out my body pieces. I then used this rectangle to make 4 right triangles to make up the 2 side gores. This was already so baggy of a shift that the gores don't actually serve their purpose of like giving walking space. They're really just there for aesthetic purposes to look more historical, and I like the look of the side gores, so I added them. Sewing the point of these gores is really a pain in the butt, and I definitely never end up with it being inserted symmetrical, but as I always say, no one will ever see it anyways, except for of course in this video, but I always show my mistakes, so this is something that always happens in mine. Now essentially the garment is put together. It just has this very giant neckline currently, which we need to gather down. I decided to do this stitching by hand by using 2 parallel rows of running stitches all the way around the neckline, starting and ending in the front middle for adjustment. Now the trial and error begins, trying to figure out what measurement the neckline should be gathered to. I did a rough measurement to get something in the ballpark before starting trying it on, and like an idiot, I tied it off, which stops me from being able to undo it easily because I was so confident that I was overestimating the neck size rather than underestimating it. So after my failed try on, it took me absolutely ages to get this stupid knot undone because I was not redoing those gathers. This second time was a lot better enough that I actually moved on with it. But you can see here it's definitely too big. It's coming down really far and it's not making like a nice scoop neck. It's rather square because it's so big. The gathered neckline is going to be finished with a binding strip, and once I pinned that binding strip on and tried it on again, I realized it was way too big and would not work. So I unpinned it and did one more time gathering, seeing how you can see how much I took out of that binding strip, and finally ended up with the perfect measurement, I think. Now that I was happy with the neckline, it's time to sew down those gathers. So instead of basting, I chose to use a million bajillion pins to hold those gathers nice and even, or at least even enough that I was going to be okay with it. I'm not super diligent about these things. I see everyone making their Bernadette banner pirate shirts with their perfectly gathered shoulders and cuffs, but I'm okay with just an okay gather that I stitch in by machine. That's fine with me. Because of all the regathering I had to do, it caused lots of fraying going on along the top of the neckline. So after removing all of the pins, the first thing I did was trim off all of those stray threads that were just everywhere. To finish binding the gathers, I just turned over the raw edge to tuck it in and pin that down all the way around. I finished this inside edge with hand stitching. I used little whip stitches trying to catch lots of the gathers on the inside to hold this firmly in place. This is what the hand felling looks like that I finished for basically all of the seams on the body and the gores and where it attaches the sleeves to the body, using that same stitch all the way through. And of course, it was important for another try on here. You'll notice I'm using hair ties to sort of replicate what the sleeve will look like because they look really ugly when they're just like hanging loose. But it's looking good. I'm pretty happy with it. I have full mobility. The gussets out of silk look a little silly, and it sits nicely off the shoulder, which is what I was looking for, because you'll notice in the original gown it sits very far down on her shoulders, like almost so far down it's like, how's it not falling off? But I don't know if I'll be able to achieve that, but I'll try. Up next is the cuffs, something that will actually be visible on the finished gown and that I can sort of match from the movie. I started by doing whipped gathers by hand. This is to get those very large 25-inch sleeves down to about 9 inches, which will allow me to fit my hand through without having to have a button or a closure or drawstring of any kind, and will also create a finished edge. For learning how to do whipped gathers, I found this great tutorial by Burley and Trowbridge for this stitch because I suck at filming hand sewing because I like to do it lounging on the couch and I can't be bothered to figure out how to set up my camera. So when I do try to film, I like tuck it under my chin and it never really works. And the lighting was bad here, but essentially you're wrapping the thread around sort of a rolled hem. And then when you pull tight, it gives you the gathers and also finishes off the edge all in one. I gathered each cuff down in 3 different sections, making sure I was gathering each section down to about 3-ish inches to get to 9 in the end. And this was just to make sure that my thread didn't break when gathering and then having to restart all over again. So at least it was in 3 separate groups. Pulling the thread to gather was so satisfying, and you just tie off the thread and start stitching the next section once you're done. Here's what one of the chunks looks like gathered down. To attach to that finished gathered edge of the sleeve, I will attach a double fold strip with a gathered ruffle inside of it. I used a trick with a pin and an iron to make double fold tape. Now one side of the ruffle needs to be finished, and this is my giant fail trying to do a rolled hem by machine. I definitely don't have the right foot for that, and it's so bad. So guess what? I had to do it by hand. I hadn't done a rolled hem before, and yeah, I got another video for you. Retro Claude has a great video on doing a rolled hem, and she shows examples on a bunch of different kinds of fabric. But essentially, you do this sort of zigzag pattern, switching the direction of pushing through the fabric and stitching to the side. And then when you pull tight, it rolls on itself and creates this nice tiny hem. Here are the two ruffle pieces with the finished rolled hems, and they have 2 lines of machine gathering stitches. They were then gathered down to about 9-ish inches. That will be then sandwiched in between that double fold tape that I just made with the iron, and that will finish off the other edge of the ruffle. I did choose the lazy way out, and I machined top stitch to hold all of these layers together, and then I used a French seam to complete the cuff to make it, a circle. And finally, this cuff is then attached to the end of the finished sleeve, matching up the seams along the side. These were then whipped together, trying to catch every single little gather to make it super secure and connected. Last thing was left is to hem, which I didn't film because I hate hems, and hems are the worst thing ever, but this is the final shift. I'm wearing the shift here with a mock-up bodice for the underdress, which will be coming next, so stay tuned. I'm very happy with these sleeves, and I cannot wait to see what they look like underneath the oversleeve, where they get to puff out all dramatically, which makes me want to just only sew 24/7 until I get this dress done. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to come back if you want to see more of my making of this dress.